Hey, did you guys hear the guy who won the Democratic primary for mayor of New York once checked boxes for African and Asian on one of his applications for college, a college he ended up not attending because he is, in fact, born in Africa and is of East Asian descent. This is very upsetting, though, for reasons. Of course, the guy he beat in the primary has an extremely detailed Wikipedia page just dedicated to his long history of sexual harassment accusations. But, that's neither here nor there. Don't look at that. Don't look at that. Look over here. Look at this guy who correctly identified his racial background on a college application when he was a teenager. Okay, obviously this is all stupid bullshit. If you haven't been following this story, Zohran Mamdani was an underdog in the New York City mayoral Democratic primary, but he built a tremendously successful campaign by asking New Yorkers what they wanted out of a mayor, suggesting common sense policies that would improve the life of the average resident, and saying things that he actually seemed to believe without first running those ideas past a focus group full of billionaire donors. This has infuriated the conservative Democratic establishment, and so the New York Times stepped up to do their part to undermine Mamdani and give a boost to the serial sexual abuser who is going to run against him now as an independent in the actual election this fall. Because it turns out vote blue no matter who only applies to us filthy progressives. Obviously, social media isn't reality. We all live in our little bubbles, but it certainly seems to me that every reasonable person saw that New York Times hit piece and just laughed at it. And maybe got even more excited about Mamdani because the establishment is panicking, which means he could actually win this thing and inspire other progressives to run for office and win. But beneath the obvious clownery is a much, much darker story that I think merits a second glance. Namely this: how did the New York Times even find out what boxes Mamdani checked on his college application 16 years ago? The Times reports that they obtained this information from an intermediary who goes by the name Cremieux on Substack and X, who they describe as an academic who opposes affirmative action and writes often about IQ and race. Do you see them? The red flags, do you see them? Cremieux, they say, obtained the information from a massive hack of Columbia University that the hacker told Bloomberg at the time was done to verify whether or not the university was continuing to consider race as part of their admission process, in violation of the 2023 Supreme Court decision that effectively destroyed affirmative action. At that time, the hacker was anonymous, and the New York Times chose not to reveal either the hacker or the identity of the pseudonymous intermediary Cremieux. It is, of course, normal for a newspaper to protect the anonymity of certain sources if revealing their identity would put them in danger. But it's also necessary if the newspaper in question is hoping that the average reader doesn't wonder exactly what the source has been writing when they say they write often about IQ and race. Luckily, The Guardian didn't have any reason to protect the identity of Cremieux in this piece from March describing a convention of racists. Jordan Lasker is his name, and The Guardian does not hesitate to describe precisely what he has to say about IQ and race. Arguments so discredited that journals, including Proceedings of the Royal Society and Psychological Science, have retracted articles that relied on the data. In 2020, the scholarly European Human Behavior and Evolution Association published a blanket condemnation of the data alongside its code of conduct on its website, writing, "Any conclusions drawn from these data are both untenable and likely to give rise to racist conclusions." The data was originally published by Richard Lynn, a man who described himself as a scientific racist and who was once the editor of Mankind Quarterly, a racist publication I have actually discussed several times now in what I'm now considering my ongoing series on eugenics and its link to science and skepticism. In fact, The Guardian has this to say: Jordan Lasker has also sought to rehabilitate and employ Lynn's work in papers published under his own name, perhaps most controversially in a co-written paper, Global Ancestry and Cognitive Ability. One of his co-authors, Brian Pesta, was later dismissed from his tenured professorship at Cleveland State University over the use of National Institutes of Health data in the paper. That's Brian Pesta, my old friend from the James Randi Educational Foundation forums, who I talked about in this video last year, all about how Nazis are secretly funding science YouTubers to launder hate speech through the lens of science and skepticism. Isn't it nice when everything just falls into place like this? It truly is a small world full of Nazis. So that was the intermediary that the New York Times protected in order to publish their hit piece on Mamdani. But what about the hacker who originally stole that data? Who was that? I'm so glad I asked. I found the answer thanks to Elizabeth Lopato at The Verge, who correctly identified the hacker as a violently racist anime Nazi. If you thought that Jordan Lasker's rantings were baldly racist, the hacker in question makes Lasker look artful and subtle. For a start, their username on Shitter and other social media sites is the N-word. They repost statements and images such as swastikas, miss you Hitler, and minorities have no place in our world. And they themselves posted such things as I am racist, I am violently racist toward black people, and a picture of a unicorn sitting on a swastika. On a post from November 5th, 2024, when then presidential candidate Kamala Harris's X account was encouraging people to vote, the alleged hacker's account replied, "You will be executed." The next post after that was, "Kill them all, please, Mr. President." When another X account asked the anime Nazi if they were concerned about law enforcement, they replied with a quote of a post from President Donald Trump. "He who saves his country does not violate any law." And all of this is, according to Lopato, an open secret online. Like, it's pretty easy to find all this out. So the New York Times accepted hacked data that a scientific racist got from a violently racist Nazi, and they chose to publish the data as an indictment of a brown, African-born, East Asian Muslim man who wants all children to have access to pre-K education, instead of asking themselves, hey, is the real story here something about how a self-described violently racist Nazi currently having the private data of millions of people, including their social security numbers, addresses, family members' information, and citizenship status? Because personally, I find that fucking terrifying. That's the personal information of at least every person who applied to Columbia University between 2019 and 2024, but obviously goes back further. And it also includes the data of people who applied to or attended New York University as far back as 1989, as well as those at University of Minnesota. The anime Nazi also claims to have hacked the University of Mississippi and Miami University of Ohio. And again, this is a person who describes themselves as violently racist towards black people and who keeps a list of black people. What is the worst that could happen here? So why did the New York Times choose to ignore the Nazis with all this personal information on black and brown people and instead focus on mocking a brown man's correct application to a college that he didn't even attend? One can only wonder. A generous response, I think, is to simply say that deep-seated professional and cultural traditions play a part. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Laurel Leff in her 2005 book, Buried by the Times, The Holocaust and America's Most Important Newspaper, in which she details the paper of record's horrific downplaying of the Nazi regime, either ignoring the Holocaust entirely or burying stories in the back of the paper. All of this is hardly a surprise, considering that the first article the New York Times ever published about Adolf Hitler described his anti-Semitic rhetoric as not so violent or genuine as it sounded. That's right, they wrote, he was merely using anti-Semitic propaganda as a bait to catch masses of followers and keep them aroused, enthusiastic, and in line for the time when his organization is perfected and sufficiently powerful to be employed effectively for political purposes. A sophisticated politician credited Hitler with peculiar political cleverness for laying emphasis and overemphasis on anti-Semitism, saying, "You can't expect the masses to understand or appreciate your finer real aims. You must feed the masses with cruder morsels and ideas like anti-Semitism. It would be politically all wrong to tell them the truth about where you really are leading them." So yeah, deep-seated professional and cultural traditions at the New York Times really made it inevitable that they would provide adequate cover to the new fascists rising up to terrorize immigrants and people of color here in the United States. Don't fall for it. If you are in New York City, please vote for Mamdani in the fall. He seems pretty dope. If you need to access any of the sane reporting that is continuing to come out of the New York Times, yes, there are still plenty of good journalists still working there. I encourage you to use your library card or gift links that you find online. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.